Well, they know each other. Good afternoon and welcome. Good evening. We're glad to see another normal crowd out to one of our council meetings. Always like a full house or a semi-full house. And it is 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. And always advise council members if there's any issues that... And the first thing we like to check, how's the sound at the back? Good enough, okay, because we do have speakers behind there and we usually have to adjust them. We have a fairly long agenda this evening, a bit more full than we sometimes have, but we'll get through it. We've got some big issues and some small issues of great importance and quite a few things in between. And I'd like to start now with the declaration, or just a reminder to council members if there is any conflict of interest issues that come up in the agenda today that you recuse yourselves appropriately and so you're not involved in those discussions. And then I would look for a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Thank you, and seconded, thank you. Any additions or deletions? The crowd can go home if we delete the right items. Okay, I see no deletions. All those in favor? And we'll begin. We're really pleased this evening to have the Regional District budget presentation, which is an annual presentation. Slight change in the printed agenda. Tara Crosby provides administrative assistance at the SDRD, but Tina Perreault, the treasurer and financial officer, is with us to do the presentation. And just before we turn it over to her on the microphone, I'd just like to acknowledge that we also have the CAO of the Regional District with us in the front. And at the back, we have two of the directors, the chair of the Community Service, the Budget Committee, Frank Morrow from Area A, and also Director Ian Wynn from Langdale, who's vice chair of the committee and of the regional board. So we have directors from both extreme ends of the coast. Welcome to Sechelt, and we're really pleased that you're here. And we look forward to this every year. So if I could turn it over to Tina Perreault, and that microphone will go on when you're prepared to start, or when you press it.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us here to present the Sunshine Coast Regional District's 2018 budget presentation. Again, I'm Tina Perreault, Chief Financial Officer, and today we'll go over some highlights for the Regional District financial planning process after our budget process that's just concluded. Which way? Oh, other side.
It's on. Oh, sorry about this.
Can we do it manually? Or from the keyboard?
We can do it manually too. You can do it manually.
Yeah. This is why rock and roll bands do sound checks.
Sorry.
It's okay. We're not a rock and roll band.
Sorry about that. It's okay.
So that just advances it and that goes back.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne.
Yes, it's when you need music in the background. Okay, so we're just going to go over some introduction, a little bit about the regional district model, financial planning process. We'll talk about some key items that have impacted the budget for 2018. We're going to be talking a little bit about the budget figures, which I know a lot of people are interested in, as well as some of the project highlights, especially the ones that directly impact those services that the District of Sechelt participates in. And again, we just concluded our final budget meeting on Monday, so we'll just give a few highlights as to what transpired there. And lastly, we'll talk about the Sunshine Coast Regional Hospital District. Even though that's a separate legal entity, I think it's important to mention as it's a different budgeting process. And we'll take any questions or information that we have. So, of course, the regional district spans the entire Sunshine Coast, including some of the islands. So that was kind of an interesting point today as presenting the Sea Sheltonian Government District, that people forget the regional district spans over all the way up to Thormanby, Nelson Island, all the way to Gambier. So quite a vast area we cover. We have 5 rural areas and 3 member municipalities, of course, District of Sechelt being one of them. So the regional district provides 45 distinct services. We have over 100 different budgets that we need to manage, and they're all within distinct services. Of those, the SRD provides 20 of those to the District of Sechelt. So from the regional district model, it's always important to kind of touch on that only those properties that participate in a service are taxed for that particular service. It can be delivered in any combination. It can be delivered through some of the rural areas with some of the member municipalities, as the town of Gibson's fire department, or it can also be delivered through an MOU or a third-party contract, as the Sechelt Library or the Scredo contract is for economic development. So regional tax rates are different in a regional district in the sense where we don't have an overall mill rate. Each service has its specific rate. So we often get calls from people coming to the Sunshine Coast saying, what is the mill rate in the regional district? And so it's a great opportunity to provide some education at that time for someone considering moving in the regional district. So taxpayers are taxed on the basis of property assessment, and it can be any combination of land or land and improvements. So for instance, community recreation is only taxed on improvements and not on people who just own bare land. So the financial planning process at the regional district starts with the strategic plan. There's 7 key priorities, and that really leads the financial planning process. Department business plans also help guide what projects will come forward, and those things are such things as the Solid Waste Master Plan, Comprehensive Regional Water Plan, or Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So that then leads into the annual budgeting process, and of course throughout the year we provide variance reports and work plan updates as well. So from a timeline perspective, our budgeting process starts in the fall of each year. So it then leads into our 2 budget meetings, which are in January and again in March. And then we have final adoption on March the 22nd scheduled for this year. A regional district needs to adopt its financial plan by March 31st of each year, which is a little bit different than a municipal setting where they have the May deadline. So again, we have public presentations like this one to present our financial plan, because of course it's an open and transparent and process. And again, through those variance reporting and work plan updates. Again, we noted that in October we're going to be having an election. So for 2019, we can expect the financial planning process to then begin and take sort of a different tact as far as a lot of information and learning. So for 2018, our budgeting process started with some pre-budget meetings, which happened November 30th and December 1st. Those are an opportunity for the committee to review all the proposals coming forward from the regional district standpoint, as well as our community partners and stakeholders, which are places such as our museums, our libraries, and a lot of our economic development and youth programs. We also held some pre-budget meetings for those community groups this year to help them prepare for the budgeting process when they come to the regional district board to request funds. That was something out of last year that we took, and it really assisted those community groups in being prepared this year. So in addition, there have been several information reports coming to various committees of the regional district that have helped provide background to some of the proposals coming forward. So some of the highlights here in relation to the services that the regional district provides for the District of Sechelt would be just the most recent meeting on March the 1st, which was the special ISC on water. We also had some comprehensive reports at the February corporate and administrative services on solid waste implications. that had some material impacts to the budget this year, as well as some other things on some cost-sharing programs that the regional district and the District of Sechelt also participate, such as Sunshine Coast Tourism. So from the budget proposal criteria, most budget proposals have either one of these rating, and it helps the committee and the board make decisions as they come through from a priority perspective. So those items this year that were considered mandatory, so imminent asset failure, safety, or regulatory compliance, so those are types of things where we have a mandate from a third party to do those, so they're really not a choice. We have loaded those into the budget so the board understands what the tax implication is right from the get-go. Typically in the past we wouldn't load those in, and it would give a negative impact from the tax perspective, so it gave sort of a false start in the first rounds of budget. So again, things that are identified in the plan move things along within a implementation plan. Low cost, high value, and other are the other rating criterias. So some of the key items impacting the 2018 budget this year were changes to assessment, which we'll touch on later. We also have the full impact of the transit expansion. So that was approved in 2017. So we have the full 12-month impact in 2018 because it was just the last quarter of 2017 last year. We also had some base budget impacts. So again, collective bargaining increases is something that is mandated. And we also had some decreases. So we had some positive reductions to WCB and employee benefit costs. And we just highlighted there the change with the landfill closure costs for 2017. And that's that report I was saying in February. So again, that had an increase. There was a decision made by the board to increase the landfill post-closure liability costs by $125,000 for the next few years for us to try to meet those obligations in the future. So again, 2017 carry forward projects, those projects that haven't been completed in the past or multi-year don't have any financial implication to the budget. So 2018, again, saw some significant increases to assessments for the region. Overall, it increased over 16% compared to 2017, and the converted assessed values increased by over 15%. So these are the values for net taxable values. So not to get too complicated, but this is really the tax basis, how these things are multiplied through those various rates. So again, just talking about the overall figures, non-market growth speaks to growth, and that went up over the whole region by 1.94%. For the town of Gibsons and District of Sechelt, you saw over a 2% growth rate. So of course, this is the average. And then the increase due to market conditions increased by 14%. So that really means what your neighbor and you could sell your house last year compared to this year and the overall average. Oops, sorry. So this just gives sort of a graphical depiction of what that looks like. And what's really important with assessments in a regional district model is what portion of the pie you will pay for if all things being equal. And what impact does assessments have to that? So for the District of Sechelt, last year you would have paid 26.71% of that pie, and this year, just in a generic perspective, you'd pay over 27%. So for 2018 budget figures, again, this has not been updated from Mondays, but we're looking at over a $55 million budget overall. So that's an increase over last year. We've got an operating budget of almost $38 million, and we have a capital budget of almost $18 million. So again, we had a couple of projects approved on Monday that will increase some of these values, especially on the capital side. So taxation after round two, again, these are just preliminary as we're just doing the final calculations, and the final assessment values will also have some impact to these. We don't get those until the end of the month. So again, as people appeal their property assessment values, some of these values might change slightly. So overall, the regional district has an increase of over 5%, 5.2, which just equates to almost $1 million. For the District of Sechelt, the overall increase was 8.31%, and the average change to residential property class is a little over 7%. So parcel tax and user fees are generally approved prior to the budget, and those were done through bylaw in January. So the regional water saw an increase of about $10 per property, and our community recreation has a 0 increase from the prior years. So those are the two that impact District of Sechelt users. So just to touch on the projects that have come forward, over 70 projects came forward for consideration through the budgeting process. They equated to almost $10 million, $9.5 million. But the caveat is one of the projects, which is the third phase of metering for the District of Sechelt and the Sechelt Indian Government District, is almost a $6 million project. So that is where one of those larger numbers comes from. So there is $362,000 that were from new taxation. This doesn't include the two items I've already mentioned before, which is for transit expansion and for that landfill closure. So these are just additional community or SCRD asks. Our community partners and stakeholders came forward with over a $357,000 ask over 2017. The most significant was from the district or the Sechelt Library. And so as of round one, and there hasn't been any change to this, is over $70,000 of new funds were approved for 2018. So just to touch on a few of the highlights of the projects that were approved during the budgeting process. The first is to support the newly elected board and to ensure that a strategic plan will be developed, so to hire a consultant and make sure that that particular process is supported. We also have a few key components for some IT. One of the key outcomes of the ongoing asset management work at the Sechelt Regional or Sunshine Coast Regional District is our asset management planning, and we focused on our IT department because that wasn't part of our corporate asset management plan, and it's identified a gap of almost $500,000 annually. So it was approved to do an incremental increase of about $50,000 a year to come to some sort of meeting of parity as to what's required for those systems. So from the planning and community development side, the highlight for District of Sechelt would be that new fitness equipment for the recreation facilities was approved, and that was a $265,000 ask, but funded through reserves, so no tax implication to that. Those new facilities, we call them new facilities, are already 10 years old, so we have a lot of new fitness or those fitness equipments that needs replacing. We also have the water efficiency plan, and that project specifically relates to the occurrence of the drought last fall, where we had ice users at the Sechelt or Sunshine Coast Arena looking for other sources of water to put the ice plant in. So that's what this project's about and was approved during round two. And again, just really focusing on some facility maintenance on those ones. From the continuation, we have Hillside. It has a financial position that is positive, and so there was some reports coming forward during committee to discuss what we would do with those funds, and as a result, the financial planning process has recommended a business plan for that particular site. So that was approved during round two. Again, some regulatory maintenance with our dike maintenance at that site as well was approved. For cemeteries, again, focusing in on some business planning for those cemeteries, not just for Seaview, but we also inherited the site up in Elphinstone, up at Cemetery Road. So that's a 10-acre parcel of land. That's sort of the next phase of what the cemetery planning will be part of that. So that's another item where the District of Sechelt also participates in that service. Again, in ports too, we've done a lot of asset management planning. The District of Sechelt doesn't participate in our ports function, but it was interesting to learn how people don't know that we operate a lot of those docks that the boating community goes to, such as Thormanby, for instance. So big project approval of almost $500,000 for that site as well. So again, full cost expansion for transit. We've got some preventative maintenance for our facilities. And again, our Sechelt landfill. So there was a lot of projects coming forward from a regulatory compliance perspective, a lot more monitoring and whatnot that's needed to be done there. And again, some site improvements and maintenance items to keep those facilities going. So from the infrastructure services, the water utility services has a lot of projects coming forward. We have 3 new large capital projects for new source watering, the universal metering, and we also have some safety items at the water treatment plant. They're going to be changing how they chlorinate the water, and so that was approved, and I think that's a real positive step forward. We've also got some risk mitigation type of projects coming forward from exposed water mains, etc. So that's a very positive thing as well. And again, just some regular vehicle replacements and whatnot for the fleet for that service. So round 2 just happened on a Monday, and again, the key items to focus on that particular meeting was to finalize the final projects to be included in the financial plan, report to the committee on the final year-end surplus deficit positions for 2017. Per our financial sustainability policy, any surpluses go into reserves. And we did have a few functions with deficits, and we talked about how we could mitigate some of those. We had very few functions that had any budget proposals that required further decisions, but they're listed there. We had a few community partners, one being the Sechelt Library, as far as any additional funding requests that also went forward. And again, we now work on finalizing the financial plan bylaw to come for final reading on March the 22nd. So just wrapping up and touching on the Sunshine Coast Regional Hospital District. We adopted the provisional budget in December. And again, that will be coming forward for adoption on March the 22nd as well in a separate meeting to be approved. But just wanted to highlight that the completion of the Sechelt expansion and renovation has been finished. It had its grand opening, I think, about a month ago. And it's important to note that that's almost a $47 million project that has gone on since 2007. And the renovation project was almost $6.5 million. And the community has funded over $16 million of that particular project. And of course, the debt has been paid off since 2007 when it was first taken, so we're already halfway through it. So that's very good news. And again, continuing to support Vancouver Coastal Health and the Sechelt Hospital on almost $250,000 of annual minor capital equipment. There's been a delay, I think, in regards to the expansion. So they have committed to the Regional Hospital District to try to spend those funds, because there's almost $750,000 that has kind of built up over the years. So great news. The budget for 2018 shows a reduction of over $300,000 for the Regional Hospital District, and that's because some past debt have fallen off. So that's some positive news for the hospital district. So that concludes my presentation. And I did want to note that on the Regional District website, there is a lot of information as far as those tax rates and the types of services that are participated on. So it's just listed there on the SCRD budget site there. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We'll see if councillors have any questions. I had 1 or 2 small ones, but maybe while they're formulating their thoughts, there was one process question. We really appreciate these presentations, and I know you've been doing them up and down the coast. The other side of public engagement is when the public can comment on the budget. Is there any particular way that the public can intervene or raise their hands on these issues?
We hold the meetings, they're public meetings. So often we do have the public partake in those meetings. In round one, we had a few public. There have opportunities at the end to ask some questions and whatnot. We also on here have a feedback forum, and we do have from time to time questions from various community members on specific items. So we do answer those on a regular basis. They don't just happen during budget, they may come in July. So otherwise we do the recordings, and on March the 1st, we also had a Coast Cable presentation where it is the local government day. And so community members from any of the regional district, including the member municipalities, can call in and speak to their elected official and ask questions at that particular time.
Great, thank you. We really appreciate the awareness you're doing, but when you make the public aware, then they also want to weigh in usually. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I haven't asked our directors, our members on your board this, but I thought I'd ask you. Audio tapes. I know you audio tape your meetings. Are those uploaded to your website? And if not, is that something that the board is considering? Because I know both municipalities do that.
In the past, so nothing has come forward as a proposal for this particular budget year. As far as having those on our website, I don't believe the recordings are on there. I would have to follow up with our corporate officer on that. It has come forward in the past for recording the meetings as well, and that hasn't been approved in the past. So who knows for the
so maybe
future.
that's something I'll put forward to our directors to bring up. Given that most of your meetings happen during the day, for those people in the community who work during the day, you know, that's hard for them to get there. If they're interested, it would be nice to be able to have access to that information. The other piece that we do as well here is videotape our meetings and post those. And I understand that Gibson's is in the process of doing that as well. So I'd like to challenge the regional district to look at doing something like that to make your meetings more accessible to the community. Then one other thing, you indicated that we now have the expansion to the transit. I think it's probably too early to have information on ridership and revenue on that. Okay, so I'll look forward to that information down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seegers, and you can be assured that the issues of public presentations, videotapes and audio tapes have been raised at committee stages. The board's not ready for it yet for some reason. And Councillor Shanks.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I know there's been two things in the media lately that are on people's minds. One of which is, the potential water sources, coming down, the pike sort of thing, and the other one is the potential closure of the garbage dump being brought forward a few years. Are we currently looking for another location for that? I'm not sure if you would know the answer to that or not, but I'm just asking the question. No, maybe.
CAO Lovies can respond to that.
Thank you very much. So it is on the work plan to do some investigative work around a site location, but right now the focus is on the management of our current site, and the board will be considering how to look at engineering the existing site. So it is in the work plan. There isn't a budget allocation at this point. It isn't necessary, but it is on the radar screen. Yeah.
So just before we let you go, and either one of you could answer this one, but the other, speaking of water, the big issue, of course, is the most important thing we've done and supported by everyone in this table, probably, hopefully in the room, is the water metering that's going forward. Now, you did mention the change that it'll be fully debt funded in 2018. So does that change the process in terms of when it might be able to start, or does that have any effects in terms of approval for that debt or anything like that we need to know, or will it still roll out in 2018 as far as you know? Don't know or do know? Just to reassure everyone.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the plan is to continue with the program, and we did actually have a little bit of grant money left over, so we're looking at including that in this process, and it is included in the work plan. So yes, we've received a lot of public feedback in terms of continuing on with the program, so that's the intent.
Great, thank you for that confirmation. Seeing nothing else, thank you both for being here to do the presentation, and thank you to the two directors that were here, Director Wynne and Director Frank Morrow. I just mentioned in passing that Frank from Area A is also the chair of the Regional Hospital District, and he's exactly the man you want if you're putting major capital projects together and need somebody to watch over them. So thank you both for your work on this, and thank you for the presentation. Yeah. Now, seeing everyone was here for the Regional District presentation, a 5-minute recess so you can leave. No, Todd, thank you for being here. Todd McGowan, second delegation for this evening, which is on SSC Properties Limited update. And this project and proposal will come further into the agenda later on this evening. So, Todd, it's now your turn.
Thank you very much. Mayor and Council, it's very good to be back in front of you guys after such a long time. I wanted to extend a quick thank you to the Director of Planning, Tracy Corbett, for the work that she has done to get this project back on track and back in front of you, and also to Andrew Yates and Doug Stewart for their efforts that they've put in. You've all had a chance to look at the presentation in the agenda package, so I'm going to flip through the slideshow and just mention a few key points. It has been a very long road for SSC to this point. We've been working now for 4 years to create a development plan based on community input that is backed by global best practices and will positively serve Sechelt for a very long time to come. We have an incredible opportunity here to create significant positive change for Sechelt with this project and become a leader in innovative, sustainable development. We can create a healthier and happier community and planet through this plan, and I for one, am extremely eager to get started on this. In terms of today, as you will remember, Council unanimously approved first reading of the Sechelt Sustainable Community Plan on April in 2016, which unfortunately had to be rescinded in October of 2016 due to errors in the staff report. What is before you today is essentially the same proposal and draft bylaw. It is my hope that we can move on to a public hearing within the next month or so to receive input from everyone in our community. I believe that this is an important and long overdue step in the process. For Council, this will let you know clearly what the community thinks of the SSC development plan. And for SSC, it provides us with another opportunity to receive feedback on the plan and change it if needed to support the needs of the Sechelt community moving forward. The SSC plan will be rolled out over 15 to 20 years, and this slide is just a quick reminder of the various neighborhoods that will be created as the project is developed. It's important to note that the current Silverback zoning contemplates significant density for this location. It is an approved plan that could be built tomorrow. But personally, and I know I have a lot of support here and with the people online watching, I don't think the community needs or wants another golf course. The proposed SSC zoning is a gradual build out with less density than the current zoning. I should note here that SSC is a brownfield site. The property is a brownfield site. It's been logged twice and it served as a gravel pit for decades. It is tailor-made for development, it is zoned for development, and it will be developed in the near future by somebody. This slide highlights a few of the benefits of the SSC development plan. I won't go through it. And this one lists some of the components that will be firsts for Sechelt if this plan moves forward. Economic impact. As everyone here and everyone watching online knows, sizable tax increases each year are unsustainable for most residents. In my view, the only viable solution is to ensure the well-being of current and future residents is to promote smart growth. Such growth provides increased annual tax revenues to the district that will help significantly in keeping current residents' tax burdens in check. New residents also increase the number of customers for local businesses, which is why I'm happy to remind Council that the Sechelt Downtown Business Association is fully supportive of our proposal, as well as numerous community associations and other interest groups. Growth in Sechelt is the best way to ensure that we can continue to enjoy the great life that we all live here. I know some are opposed in principle to growth and development, but with an aging population, we need it. We need the resources, we need the services, and we need younger people to move and work here to support our current way of life. Also, done properly and with long-term perspective, we will be able to take the concerns of today regarding things like water and other infrastructure and create solutions that improve the lives of everyone. Everyone in Sechelt will benefit from this development plan in one way or another. Financial contributions from DCCs and annual taxes will help fund important infrastructure needs and reduce the need for annual tax increases to current residents. 250 attainable housing units, which we would like to start building as soon as possible, are badly needed. 225 homes for the elderly in our age-in-place neighborhood, which are equally needed. Creating new, attractive jobs for young and old people alike. Locally grown produce, a very large number of amenities that are not available elsewhere in Sechelt, an all-weather turf sports field, local agriculture, and a paddling center are just a few of them. Having said all of this, SSC is at a crossroads. Following years of significant expense and effort with limited results to date, we see that we have three options. We can proceed now with the SSC vision of creating an integrated, sustainable community. We can build the current zoning of the golf course and 1,600 homes, or we can sell the property to a third party that would most likely have little or no connection to the Sunshine Coast. Again, I reiterate that this is not going to be an overnight change. This is at least a 15 to 20-year development once we get shovels in the ground. I mean, I'll probably be moving into the age-in-place by the time this thing is completed. So I remain hopeful that this project can come to fruition and serve as an example of how we should be developing land moving forward. In my view, proceeding with the SSC vision is the only thing we should be considering, and I hope that you all agree. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, I will try to answer them.
Thank you very much, and especially for a concise presentation, which we are familiar with. So, Councillor Inkster has a clarification or question while you're here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Todd, for the presentation. As was mentioned, it was concise and lots of graphics that were fairly understandable, so that's helpful. One of your slides at the beginning talked about at build-out, 750 jobs at full build-out that you mentioned. And then you mentioned the time horizon on the development would be 15 to 20 years. So based on those two sets of, the original claim and the sets of figures as you envision it to be built out, when would that 750 jobs be then in that process, and what would it then be in?
Yeah, so the 750 jobs mentioned on the slide there is at full build out. That is what will be long-term full-time employment available. During construction, I believe it's about 600 or 650. We had an economic assessment done of the project by a group out of Vancouver, and these are all numbers that they provided to us.
So that's construction jobs, 650 if the market is optimum and there's enough uptake on the units being built, so you'd continue to construct and those numbers would be employed.
Exactly. I mean, this whole project will be market driven, and
okay.
It'll. Who knows what the economy is going to be doing? This could be a 50-year build. Who knows?
Okay. Thanks for that.
Anything else from councillors at this point? We will come back to this as item 8.3 on the agenda a little later. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. So, of course, for us, it's been a little while since we've seen this project back on any agenda. So I'm just curious if you could highlight any changes that have been made in that time.
As far as the plan, it has not changed significantly. We continue to receive input from the public whenever it's available, but we've been fairly quiet just as a result of the timing with everything. The economic assessment is one thing that we've done in the last couple of years since you've seen us, and very positive results with that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Then thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will get to it, as I said, at 8.3 on the agenda, which is after we go through our other minutes and a couple of other zoning issues. So moving along, we're in no proclamations this evening, and item 5 is adoption of minutes from our previous council meeting of February 21st, the one I missed. So I would look first for a motion to receive and adopt those minutes. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz. Are there any errors or omissions noted in that section? And that's pages 43 to 52 of tonight's agenda. Seeing none, I'll look for all those in favor of adoption. All those, none opposed, that's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? No business arising. We'll move to our committee minutes and reports. Item 7 and 7.1 is the minutes of the Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee. And this is the one that has discussion of the bollards in West Sechelt in item 8. So first, a motion to receive these minutes and recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers, and all were in favor. Are there any of these recommendations to be pulled out for further discussion? Councillor Seegers?
Recommendation number 8, please.
Okay, thank you for that. And just as a process issue, we have agreed at this council that even defeated motions, which normally would just die at the committee stage, do come back to council because at council there could be a different configuration of discussion and votes. If there's no others, I'd look for a motion to adopt recommendations 2 through 7 and 9 through 12. Thank you, Councillor Inkster and Councillor Lutz. Any discussion of any of those? All those in favor? Thank you. And we can return to item 8, which is a risk management report, and it was a discussion on the bollards on Bailey Road. And I'm pleased that this came back so we can discuss. Now, I noticed in an internal memo to staff that the committee had recommended that this be referred to staff for a survey, but there wasn't actually a survey of community and to talk to them, but I don't see anything in the minutes that actually show that. And I do notice that the minutes, and I should have mentioned this when we were discussing it, the minutes and discussion under recommendation 8 actually all belong with recommendation number 7. They're all about Apollo Road. So we'll move them back a page when we get to them. There's been lots of historic discussion on the use of bollards in the community, in particular the ones on Bailey Road. I won't go back to the deepest history, but they were first approved as part of the construction phase of developments in those areas. And it was not the defining condition of development at the time, as some people are suggesting, but it was certainly at that time that they were first used. For this council, the bollards became an issue first in the election period. Actually in 2014, it was an issue that was raised, not a major issue in the election. I don't think it was a deciding issue in the election, but it was certainly something that was raised. And there was large support from everyone who was elected to maintain those. And then in 2015, there was a decision by staff to remove the bollards internally without discussion with the community or with the council. And at the time when that was raised and came back to council, council thought that that was an inappropriate move and voted to have them put back into place. And I've been on record as saying that we should be listening to the community on this. In 2016, I wrote a letter to one of the neighbors who was concerned about this project and pointed out that if public service, human safety and security were all recognized, we should be able to live with having them there as a traffic calming and a traffic stopping advice. Unfortunately, in my view, it's emerged again because, in fact, we haven't been able to balance the needs of traffic calming and traffic stopping with the safety and security risks of those who are most directly impacted. So when I look at this, I look at two values. I always want to listen to those who are most directly impacted and take their voices seriously. And I also want to listen as closely as possible to the most immediate neighborhood. It really doesn't matter what Sechelt at large thinks about the Bailey Road bollards. It matters what the people who live on Bailey Road and surrounding roads matters. But in that context, there's two groups: those that are directly impacted and feel their safety and security is at risk, and those who are less directly impacted in that way, but are impacted in terms of traffic. And we have been unable to resolve that. One of the problems is our fault on the District of Sechelt. There's no question that snow removal shouldn't end up piling snow 3 feet high in an emergency access lane. And if that happened in front of my house, I would also think that was a safety issue that needed to be addressed. That's not necessarily the same as a traffic calming, but there is a safety issue that needs to be addressed on that. So with those comments, I will turn it back to council and see what their views are on this and whether we should ask staff to review it one more time. Just for the record, though, I'll say that staff has been universally in favor of removing the bollards as long as I've known about the issue. I also, just before this meeting, talked to the fire chief, who spoke about the emergency vehicle access, and he was had permission to speak on behalf of the BC Ambulance, and both the fire department in Sechelt and the BC Ambulance provincially would prefer to see less restrictions on the road so that there's no immediate mistakes made. But they do understand the bollards now are easy to pass through. They can drive over them, and that's that was the solution that was suggested at one time. So councillors, Councillor Seegers, I'll look to you first, and others who may want to comment on this.
Thank you. At the committee, it was a tie vote, so it got defeated. And there was some discussion that we would prefer to bring it to council so that everybody on council could weigh in on it and indicate where they stood. So that's why I pulled it, and I'm looking to council to speak.
And Councillor Shanks.
Yes, thanks very much, Your Worship. I was one of those members of council that was originally involved in negotiations that took place back in 2007. So my recollection in terms of events are as follows. First of all, as was presented at the last meeting, the Public Works meeting, there are two issues now with respect to bollards, those in the Strata Road development and those on Bailey Road. While those within the Strata development would be the responsibility of the roads and everything else should anything happen, and that suggestion came up that they could be, in fact, turned over to the Strata and they would accept responsibility for their maintenance and subsequent issues that may present themselves. The Bailey Road situation has been somewhat different, but I note looking through the agendas and all the information available, even though it's been mentioned at the last presentation, there is no motion that says the bollards would be permanently installed. There was the recommendation that bollards be placed at those locations within the Strata and also on Bailey Road. The question arose in terms of two other locations where we have bollards. And one of those is on Trident Avenue. Now, for those that know Trident Avenue, it's a little road off of Wharf Road, right next to where Rented Canada is. And bollards were put up there many years ago prior to the expansion and repaving of Wharf Road. So what people were doing was they were skirting around that little shortcut by the current Rented Canada facility in terms of not going down Wharf Road and then turning on East Porpoise Bay Road. So that addressed that. The second was Chapman Road. And for those that know Chapman Road, it's the first turning off of the Davis Bay Hill as you're going down the hill on the left-hand side. That was bollarded, if you want to call it that, because of the numerous events that happened with cars being rear-ended that wanted to turn left onto Chapman Road and go up Chapman Road. That portion of Chapman Road actually services about 3, maybe 4 houses. It is a half-width road. So often we were getting situations where somebody wanted to turn left to go up that road and they were meeting a car coming down it. And so there was virtually nowhere to go. So the recommendation of staff, that got closed off at one time permanently, and now there's some movable bollards in place. In looking at this scenario, I canvassed the former director of planning, the former director of engineering, the former fire chief, and 4 members of the previous council that in fact passed the recommendations. But I repeat, at no time in any of those motions was it regarded as the bollards being made permanent. With the exception of one individual that I talked to, it was the whole purpose in putting the bollards in place was to address the enormous amount of traffic that was using Bailey Road when construction was taking place in the Adira developments. And so it was agreed and supported by the Bailey Road people that in fact that traffic would now go up Nickerson Road and come in at the top down Tyler and then come in and do the development on that basis. It was not a permanent measure, it was a temporary measure, and all the people I spoke with agree on that basis. And that's why they've gone in. And over a period of time, I would suggest the people below the bollards have become used to them being there. And the reality is, I've watched this since it last came up, Your Worship, in the spring of 2015. And on a regular basis, I go up there and I've yet to see 2 cars parked opposite each other, either side of the road, where there would be a difficulty getting through. Parking on the road is virtually non-existent, and I check it probably once a day, a month, and go up there half an hour to an hour to look at it. The pressure now is on us because the Municipal Insurance Association has come along and say, you need to do something about those bollards in terms of your liability. And when the Municipal Insurance Association says that, I perk up my ears because they're currently defending us in a very awkward situation elsewhere within the district of Sechelt. And I'd hate to go against their wishes in particular in regard to this. So that's my viewpoint. It's the impression I have had all along since the beginning of the bollards. And I hazard to say that if the president of the West Sechelt Community Association at that time, Ken Matheson, and Mr. Frank May, who was the representative of the Bailey Road residents, were here today, I believe they would have to agree with that interpretation of why the bollards were in place. Thank you.
So what do we do tonight? Councillor Inkster?
Thank you. Councillor Shanks and I have talked about this off the meetings a couple of times, and the information and the research he's done goes back a number of years to when I was on council. The only thing that I can't recollect, as Councillor Shanks and I have talked about, is that the fact that they were temporary. That's the part that I can't remember, whether we had decided that they would be a more permanent nature or temporary. So that's where I get stuck, although I do remember the number of times it's come before us. I was in support of bollards that could be removed and or I guess knocked down for emergency vehicles. So I was in favor of retaining the bollards, but having them easy to get through if there was an emergency, because as was mentioned, there's some risk assessment that's determining that we need to make those roads passable, and we need to make most of our roads and or all of our roads passable. So I hope people understand that when we when we go through this issue, and it's in a sense not as easy as some would assume it could be, and just leaving them up easily because of the concerns over risk. I would suggest, in hearing some of the issues that have come forward and setting the Apollo ones aside as part of the strata issue, and I hope that the group that's there and the strata considers that gives good consideration to the retention of those bollards, because as part of that, they then retain the responsibility on a number of different levels of those bollards. So just consider that as that strata has that discussion, that's under their purview as we've discussed. But what I would suggest we do as the chair of Public Works and Parks, and the fact that it was at that meeting and it was basically a tie vote, is that we send the issue back to staff to further discuss what can be done. Maybe they'll meet with the residents and talk to them about the risks, and also talk to those that are concerned about the emergency issues. And we also, just so the community knows, we've heard from them as well, and we don't take that lightly. So that's what I would propose, Your Worship, in terms of this issue. It's a difficult issue. I would like to see it go back to staff in order to have further discussions from that small part of our community to see if we can come up with a solution that's workable. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the staff, when the insurance company told us that they wanted the bollards removed, was this a recommendation, or was it one of those things that thou shalt do this?
Mr. Kootenay, Director of Engineering and Operations.
As the report states, it's a recommendation. It's a concern that they brought forward that, yes, they should be removed. It's a recommendation.
Oh, thank you. That helps me a lot, because if it had been a really important issue to our insurance company, they would have said to us, and you will do it. And I guess I look at these bollards, and this is a community issue. And the community, by and large, wants these bollards left in place. Now, it's been brought to my attention that my view on it is very simplistic. And it's been brought to my attention that people were parking their cars there. Well, for me, if people are parking their cars there, that's a separate issue. Phone bylaw and have the cars taken away. If snow is being piled up there, that's another separate issue. We can deal with having the snow piled up there because we can stop doing that when we do snow removal. So when I get it right back to the bollards, of whether they should be there or they shouldn't be there, it's up to the community. And at this point in time, the bulk of the community seems to want those bollards left there. And if they want them left there, why would I take them out? I haven't had a good reason yet that says, this is why you should take them out. So from my perspective, I'm going to leave them there. That's how I will vote. Thank you.
Okay. It's not even close to over yet, so hold your applause. Councillor Shanks, I see, and then Councillor Seegers, and we'll see if others want to speak before we decide.
Yeah, just very quickly, the Adira development with the strata title properties and also the I call them fee simple properties, is unique in that was a development, a huge development on that side of the hill. And it is in fact the only strata property that has bollards to limit traffic, within the confines of that strata. Other stratas on the opposite side of Nickerson Road don't have those at all. And yet they have the same road widths and everything else. I just point that out, that's all.
Thank you for that, and Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I don't think we're actually discussing the bollards on Apollo. Those we've actually passed and said they're staying. So the only ones we're talking about are the ones on Bailey. And I am in favor of removing them. One of the letters we got actually indicated that there was an emergency issue in the community, in that area, by a resident. And the bollards created a situation that was unsafe. So I am in favor of removing them and opening up this road. I think the traffic patterns are such that they're not going to be going up this road anyway. They're going to be going up Nickerson. That's the traffic patterns that have been established. So I will be voting in favor of removing them.
And other councillors on this, and then Councillor Mueller, then.
I guess I may as well jump in with my comments. I'm not a member of the Public Works, Parks and Committee, so I'm not as versed in this particular issue as some of the other members of council. But for me, this is quite a simple, principled matter. And it has to do with urban design, that when you have a group of citizens organizing on their own behalf to introduce traffic calming measures, or in this case, they're already there, I would always entertain that. And in this case, I'll be supporting that they stay.
Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I'm on record as supporting leaving them in place. And I think that the issues around the snow clearing and emergency vehicles can be handled through conversations with the groups involved, be it our public works or fire department or ambulance. I think it just takes some communication. I don't think they do harm to have them in place. And I think we need to look at having some control over the parking on street. Quite often I'll see empty driveways, but people parked on the road and on Bailey. So I think that can be dealt with too. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we try and keep our council meetings as objective and flat-lined as possible for a number of reasons. And because they are difficult decisions, and even when councillors may agree or disagree, it doesn't mean it's not done without care and thought. And all councillors need the support of their community when they're making difficult decisions, even when they disagree with the community. So one of the most important, I happen to agree with Councillor Mueller. Traffic calming in most instances is always good, and anything the community at general wants, it's their community, in your neighborhood, you should have what you want. And in first year political science, they'll tell you that never give anyone a benefit, because if you ever take it away, you'll have a revolution. And they actually have a J curve that they use for discussion of introduction of social benefits around the world and what happens if they're taken away. And so I'm not surprised at all that there's some very strong support from people who've enjoyed what they see as in benefits. However, one of the more important elements of democracy is, one, we listen to the larger majority, but we don't allow that to override the rights or the concerns of the minority. And in this case, we have a small number of people who are unable to enjoy the safety and security in their own homes because of their concerns about not the bollards themselves when they're working perfectly, but the bollards and what happens when they're not working well, when snow is piled up in front of them, when people are parking where they shouldn't be. We don't have emergency parking signs. We don't have, it's not even identified as an emergency access. So what I'm going to suggest is that the majority, the bollards are up tonight. Nobody's going to take them down. The majority of council from their comments would support leaving them up, but we do need to do some genuine work to ensure that the traffic calming or traffic stopping, as I've been told I should better use, doesn't impact negatively those who in fact are trying to simply enjoy where they live with a sense of security and safety. And I think that's as important. I would always look closely and listen carefully to the rights of minorities, because it's too easy for a group of majority people to say, oh, this is what we want, let's go forward. So I would like to, I don't think we need a vote tonight because the bollards are there. They're not going down and there's no change in policy. We do need a report from staff and some work on, one, recognizing the liability that municipal insurance has told us is there, it's real. And the first time that there's a serious problem, we're going to come back and it's going to haunt us. We need to find out why they're not working in terms of parking and why emergency vehicles sometimes don't even know they can drive over them. That has to be dealt with. And we have to come to grips with the fact the entire first responder community would prefer them not to be there. You have to listen to those voices. They're the people that we rely on the most. I don't think anyone in this room wants to increase the insecurity of those who are worried about safety. I also know the people who have written to us about safety and security issues, and in no way do they want more traffic on the road. In no way are they trying to just create a thoroughfare or places for speed. So in fact, the interests of everyone is exactly the same. It shouldn't be that hard to square the circle and ensure that in actual implementation, staff are able to find ways to calm and stop the traffic and recognize our insurance issues and the safety issues that people have. That's where I would leave it. We'll just leave it tonight. The bollards are up. There's no policy change, but we have to take seriously the concerns that are raised. Thank you. Councillor Wright?
Are you looking for a referral motion to
I don't think-
staff?
It might be useful for a resolution for staff to examine and report on this issue based on the discussion that council has had.
Is that a motion that you're making?
You just made it.
I'd be happy to second it then.
And Councillor Inkster second. But the key thing is there's no change in policy about the bollards. Okay. All those any further discussion of that? All of those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. And the bollards issue is still on the books, and it's there in place. And don't worry about any immediate changes, but we do want to make sure that we deal with the real concerns. Thank you. That was the minutes of the Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee. Moving on to the more complex meeting of the Planning and Community Development Committee of February 28th, I will ask first for a motion to receive those minutes. Thank you, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers. Any errors or omissions in there? And the one thing I'd point out, I don't know if it requires amendment, but the motions on the spectrum of care, which are 9 through 11, are all written from the committee as if they were acting as a council that day. So they've got that the report is received. Anyways, just if you look through 9, 10, 11, and there you'll find that they're all phrased as if it was tonight's meeting. They even recommended consideration of the bylaw with the financial plan, solid waste, et cetera. So I think that should be modified in terms of the minutes because that isn't actually what they did. Are there any of those, if there's no other errors or omissions, all those, I'd look for somebody to move the recommendations. Councillor Mueller as chair and Councillor Seegers seconding. And that would be recommendations, not the minutes, but the action items from recommendations 4 through 22. And just for clarification, so people are clear on what happened in some of those meetings, there was a recommendation regarding a West Sechelt Ocean View Villas. The variance on Ocean View Villas was defeated. Therefore, that project goes back to committee, i.e. to staff and to committee, and it's not going forward as currently proposed because the variance wasn't in place. The other one that was of interest, I think, to many people was the West Porpoise Bay Estates? And in that case, there was approval of parts of the project, but other parts were sent back for discussion in terms of building 7, 8, and 9, which is recommendation 18. If you read that carefully, it shows that it's referred back to staff for additional work. So those who are concerned and interested in the West Porpoise Bay Estates. You'll notice that that is being sent back to staff. It's not going forward as proposed. And that's similar to the one in West Sechelt on Ocean View. That's not going forward as proposed currently. So those, and nobody pulled those out. So that would be going forward as a group. Councillor Seegers?
I'll just make a note. There was somebody who's come just for the Sechelt Seniors Activity Center Society. That's in these minutes as well.
And that was approved at committee, was it not? The variance was approved. So if the vote is in favor of asking all of these, then the two that wanted the project slowed down will get what they want, and the Senior Citizen Center will get theirs going forward. Okay, just so we see this. It's been moved, it's been seconded. The motions, all those in favor? Any opposed? So that's carried in the very good work of the Planning Committee. It was a difficult meeting for them. They had quite a few issues to deal with, but the result is that the Seniors Activity Center goes forward as they proposed. The Ocean View is sent back for additional work, and the West Porpoise Bay one is sent back for additional work on their height and geotech. And we then go to our bylaws, item 8. 8.1, and we have a report from the community planner who will be in the presentation. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers. And Ms. Stepovic is not with us, so Tracy Corbett, our Director of Planning and Development, will speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council. The item before you is a rezoning application for an industrial area on Sechelt Inlet Road. The proposal is to rezone. Currently, it's zoned RR2, Rural 2 zone, and the proposal is to change it to I6, Industrial 6 zone. There will be separate applications coming forward at a later date, both for a development permit. There's one small part of the site that's in steep slope, and then the subdivision to put it into 10 lots. This is a preliminary layout. The road section, just to explain why that looks the way it does, it's mainly because of topography. They couldn't bring that north road directly across, so they worked on a number of options there. That was determined to be the best fit for them in terms of both the lotting and in terms of access. This is the location relative to there. So it's an unbuilt site at the moment. The area right to the north of it is the campground, and there is an I6 development right below it that would be of the same zoning. This, the image on the one side with the driveway is the entrance into the site currently, and the other picture is taken right at the interface of where there's an agricultural land reserve parcel. That shows for the OCP future land use. This was identified as business and industry. The applicants did have an open house to get some feedback on this. There were some concerns, mainly from the residents of the Omni development, of wanting it to transition into residential. The challenge on that, of course, is that there's, no matter what we do with residents, there's always an interface issue somewhere. The idea with the proposal here is, in recognizing that the interface conditions have changed, is still to keep it as a business industry kind of use, but there has been a modification to the industrial zone just to take out some of the more impactful uses. So this will function as quite a light industry. So what they have done, sorry, I have to read because I can't read that far away. What they have decided to do in terms of the modification of it is to take out the more impactful uses such as the crematorium, the boarding of animals, the aquaculture, processing of forest and wood products was one of them, and in the medical marijuana production. And this was mainly in concerns around the potential impact of that land use. So the recommendations are that Council give first reading to zoning amendment bylaw 25292, 2018. for the 5980 Seashell Inlet Road and refer it to a public hearing. Public hearing is scheduled. It is I believe March 27th for this. It is conditional on a number of aspects on that. I won't read through all of them, but one of the things we're looking at quite carefully on this is the tree permit protection and wanting to maintain a number of those existing trees at both the interface of Seashell Inlet Road and the north end to provide a little additional buffering on there for the residential uses. You'll notice a change in the conditions on there from what was approved in or looked at committee. And the main one was in A, was the demolition of the single family detached home. That was in error or a misinterpretation of it. The intention is actually that is linked to the storage use that's on the larger parcel on that land. That is both the office and the caretaker suite. So it is in keeping with the I-6 zone. I think that was the only one. And then we beefed up on the tree protection plan after consultation with the applicant, again, to try and look at those retaining more of the trees on there. And the extended work sets, that stays the same. So that is the recommendation.
Thank you. Just on that last point, it appears to me that the paper that we have in front of us has the recommendations and the conditions include A, demolition of the existing single-family home, but the PowerPoint presentation has deleted that. I would have thought that that requires an amendment to the package that's in front of us, or an amendment we'll have to be careful about how we move this recommendation. So I'm not particularly pleased that the paper in front of us is not the recommendation that we want to adopt. Second question, now what's the zoning for the campground? Do you know what that is?
It's R2 as well.
So we've got, an RR2 is what we call rural residential. So they're both rural residential and one of them is going to I-6. So it's a residential zone being proposed to become a light industrial.
Correct.
Thank you for that. Any other questions before we discuss the options and get the recommendation in front of us? Councillor Mueller?
So one of the things that came up at committee was the heron nesting, and I know we were waiting back for some information on that. That was one of the things that was hinging my vote upon this, whether we could preserve that. So I'm just curious if there's any news.
Is it a rookery?
They're looking at it. They weren't sure, so they've got an expert coming in to evaluate that, to do the assessment, and the applicant will respond to that. So it'll be part of the conditions.
But that's, again, not written down as, oh, okay, G, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'd just like to get an update when we do receive that information. I assume it will be after the public hearing, but for me, it's an important piece. I'm prepared to work at moving this forward, but my final vote is hinging upon whether we can protect that or the existence of that in the area.
Thank you for raising that. Any other clarifications or questions? Do I have somebody to move the recommendation as presented on the PowerPoint, A through G? Thank you. And seconded, it's Councillor Seegers and then Councillor Mueller. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Sorry, Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I know that A, previously with the house, was something that the proponent was looking to potentially retain. He said it's a fairly new house, and I'm glad that you came to some agreement and some way to make that work for both. Thanks.
Thank you.
Say to call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any idea when public hearing might be?
I believe it's scheduled for March 27th.
Okay. And the next item of business is actually the zoning bylaw just referred to. So I'd like somebody to move first reading of bylaw number 25292, 2018, Luch and McCarter, which is a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987 by rezoning a property at 5980 Sechelt Inlet Road from RR2 Rural 2 zone to I6 Industrial 6 zone. Thank you, Councillor Seegers. Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And we've done the referral to public hearing. 8.2, Spectrum of Care, an official community plan amendment. I'd like somebody to move thank you, Councillor Seegers, that the report be received, and seconded, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And we'll look to Mr. Thompson, community planner.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a brief presentation regarding the official community plan amendment for the Spectrum of Care. This has been, we've gone through a large engagement process, and this amendment comes as a result of that, as well as looking at best practices. So I'd like to start off by kind of the statement of intent that's both within the OCP and proposed OCP amendment, as well as kind of the philosophy behind it. And really the intent is to provide the flexibility required to provide residents with facilities that allow for aging in comfort, security, and dignity while respecting existing neighborhood character and good planning practices. So what this amendment does overall is greatly increase the flexibility when dealing with these various care facilities along the spectrum. How it does that is by looking at the underlying designation, so we wouldn't be changing any of the land use designations currently in the district, but adding these to them. So for small scale facilities, now these might be the facilities operating in a single family home that might go completely unnoticed by neighbors and everything. We're looking at greatly expanding where those are allowed, essentially looking in our residential areas. And as I get later to implementation strategies, I can talk about what we might be looking at as part of the zoning bylaw. Well, then as well as also include home support services. I'll just stating that we are supporting those. The medium scale facilities would be looking at a reduced area, and these are your typically larger facilities that can look a lot like your typical multifamily. And so it makes sense to include them in the multifamily designations, as well as the neighborhood or regional centers in the downtown. And then, of course, the large-scale facilities have a bit more restricted location that's looking more at the institutional areas, as well as the downtown and neighborhood centers. So trying to give you kind of scope of what that looks like. This is showing essentially all the residential areas, and you can see mostly in West Sechelt, they're highlighted in purple. So it's a very broad area, and these are the areas that we might be looking for the small scale facilities where they could potentially exist. So it has a large flexibility for those smaller scale facilities. For the medium scale facilities, we're looking at the multifamily areas, the neighborhood centers, and the downtown core, which of course has a smaller, more condensed. And you can see that the majority of these would be located in the downtown area, and as well as some of the other multifamily areas, like the neighborhood center located here in West Sechelt up there, as well as here, and the regional center here. And then getting to the large scale, again, it is a lesser area, but it is looking at the downtown and the institutional areas, which, again, is more sales centered around the downtown. We're also looking at some implementation strategies. While looking at this, we've also been looking at the zoning bylaw update. So some of the implementation strategies that we can look at is adding these small scale facilities serving a limited amount of residents and home support uses as uses that are permitted in all residential zones, as well as then adding the definitions and general regulations to the various spectrum of care uses and facilities, and introducing the density bonus framework to allow for increased densities in accordance with the other policies. So the recommendations are that the bylaw be given first reading, that council consider in conjunction with the financial plan, the waste management plan, and the liquid waste management plan, and that staff be authorized to schedule a public hearing. And as part of that public hearing, we also will send out the associated staff report and the bylaw to the agencies that council has already considered are affected by this, so that they inviting them to both attend the public hearing or send in written responses about the bylaw. Thank you, and is there any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, and shows the importance of the work. We didn't have anything, we had 1 or 2 lines in the OCP, and now we've got 3 pages, which tells us how complicated that really was and the work that's been done over the last year or so on that. I wondered about no real reference to small, medium, or large, not even ranges of how many units might be in a small and how many. So any idea what those transition points will be? And I just don't want them to become points of discussion in a year, or 10 years, or 5 years, 15 years from now and say, no, this is small. Oh, no, it's not. It's medium.
When doing the amendment, we didn't want to apply specific metrics and instead have that be located in the zoning bylaw. And as part of updating those regulations, we can kind of look more in towards that. Just from a general scale, the small scale facilities are usually ones that would fit in a single family homes. So you might have maybe maximum 5 beds kind of servicing that, and that might be the maximum. But currently, just under the Community Care Licensing Association, I believe you're allowed to have 3 beds with a license anywhere in the zone as well. So that's kind of within that kind of frame of what's already kind of allowed just in the provincial regulations, as well as just kind of some additional support that the district could give to it. The medium scale facilities would be looking at something that can really fit into kind of the multifamily framework. So that's we looking at, say, a multifamily business. I'm thinking again between the small and the medium, that might be between say 10 and 40 units. And again, we can develop those regulations of what actually is the kind of medium scale facilities. And then the large would be anything essentially bigger than that. And those might be the more complex facilities as well, that provides a large range of care that as people, those campuses of care where people might be able to transition without leaving the site from maybe just one building to another, or having their care needs met, that have a much larger employee base and a lot more complex in general.
So those regulations would be in the zoning bylaw at some point? Okay. I've walked by lots of 5,000 square foot single family homes, which could have more than 4 units or 5 beds in them. They could have 10 bedrooms now. So I really do think we have to be specific on that because people will build to the edge of the bylaw just by their nature. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Thank you for providing the maps. That was a piece that was missing for me previously. There are 2 considerations. One is size, and the other is actually the type of care that's provided in the facilities. If we're having a campus of care where it ranges from independent living up to extended care, for example, or hospice, I could see where that type of facility may be ideally suited to be in some of these areas like downtown where people can get out and walk around. But if we have a large scale facility that is only extended care or hospice care, if I look at the locations that are identified as for a large scale facility, we wouldn't necessarily want them in those places. We wouldn't necessarily want a hospice downtown Sechelt or an extended care facility where we have dementia care where people are in locked facilities and are not coming out. So it'll be interesting to see the feedback that we get from the public when we take this out to them and they look at types of care versus size of building and location as presented in our in the zoning bylaw here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I get more questions about when we're going to have this kind of care in our community than any other, more than water. It's more important than water to the people that I run into, even on the weekend. Why don't we have more care facilities? So I'm really glad we're putting this in place so that those who can provide them can move in quickly. I probably should move these 3 do them separately if you don't mind. Somebody to move recommendation number 2, which is for first reading. Thank you, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And recommendations 3, that it be considered in conjunction with financial plan, the solid waste management plan, the liquid waste management plan, and the wastewater treatment plan. Are we at this point conveying that we have considered it in that, or do we do that at a later point? Okay, so the question would be to have somebody to move this. Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz in this case. And I would just ask staff, have we considered this, as we consider this in light of our current financial plan, will it have any adverse impacts?
I know, Your Worship, we don't believe this will have any adverse impacts.
And for those in engineering and planning, having examined it against the SCRD's solid waste management plan, will there be any negative impacts that we're aware of?
The SCRD in their response didn't indicate any. They, of course, encourage the use of any waste reduction strategies through individual applications.
Okay, thank you for that. And we have our own District of Sechelt 2000 liquid waste management plan, which I understand is under review and might actually have another look at someday. Having examined that, can staff advise us if there was any adverse impacts to be aware of?
Not with this policy change. Individual OCP amendments that might have to do with specific lots being redesignated would have more of an impact, but as this policy change, there should be no impact.
And in conjunction with our district wastewater treatment plan under the municipal wastewater regulation, any impact on that?
No, it's the same as previous.
Thank you very much for that. All those in favor then of having considered it? Any opposed? That's carried. And finally, our last one, which is authorization for scheduled public hearing, moved by Councillor Seegers and Councillor Wright. All those in favor? Thank you very much. That's carried, and that work is done. 8.3, SSC oh, sorry, we have the bylaw itself. Yep, the bylaw itself. So somebody to move first reading of District Bylaw number 49221, 2018, Spectrum of Care, which is a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt Official Community Plan Bylaw number 492, 2010 to adopt policies that create opportunities for a spectrum of care options within the community. Moved by Councillor Lutz, Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried. Public hearing is also in March or later?
We haven't scheduled it yet, but most likely be later than.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 8.3, SSC properties. We had a presentation during the delegations on this earlier today, and now we have a report. So first, the motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright. All those in favor? It's carried, and I'll turn it to Ms. Corbett, the Director of Planning and Development Services.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. The item before you is the zoning amendment application for SSC properties. This is bylaw number 25-271, 2016. So there are a number of things that I wanted to go through tonight in terms of the actual purpose and the way the recommendation is worded. It's responding very directly to the council resolution that was set in 2016 to direct staff to address the errors that were identified and to bring the report back for first reading. Some of the things that need to be done was there were a few terminology issues and a few metric issues in the conditions of adoption. Those are listed in an attachment to your report that have been revised. And we had a fair bit of back and forth with the applicant to make sure that that was in fact the case. I will say, having gone through a lot of the background information on this, it was a less than linear process. So if there are areas in there, we may still need to go back, but I did the best I can with wading through what I had. So in terms of the location, I'm sure you're well versed in where it is. It is 10 lots. They have not been consolidated at this stage. In terms of chronology, I did go through and looked and gave you a chronology of all the council resolutions that were related to this development, just for the benefit of those listening in terms of this area has been under some form of planning or proposals for quite some time. The Silverback application that was shown, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, was the golf course. The zoning changed to the CD13, and that's what's currently on the site. It is under a number of controls in terms of the Master Development Agreement and Covenant. So while technically they could move forward with that, it does have a no-build covenant. And to remove that, there are a number of conditions that are attached to that, as well as commitments for quite a bit of money to be paid both for affordable housing and for the servicing. In 2011, the OCP was adopted, the main OCP, and that changed the future land use in this area to rural residential. In 2015, there was another amendment on it, and that was to change it to the mixed residential commercial neighborhood. Along with that was an adoption of DP11, which will also guide the development. And the rezoning application in 2016, again given first reading and then rescinded. So this is a very large development. As you can see, it's 169 acres, 418 acres. The intention to support a mixed-use development along with a private school, and upwards of 1,360 residential units associated with it. The way the bylaw is written, the base density is 1,000 units max, and the 360 depend on a number of amenities coming forward. That is the location of the OCP amendment. So, sorry, I didn't realize this was all in. So in terms of the proposed development, there are a number of elements in it, some of which mirrored a little bit of what was in the Silverback, some of it quite different. Things that it does have quite a commercial zone right down on the waterfront. A big element of this is the private school that covers quite a bit of the land area. CD13. I'm going to skip right to the comparison. So this is what is being proposed of going from the CD13 to CD38. So these are the elements that were presented to you earlier tonight. The development areas in a lot of the land base accommodates a lot of pod development of large lot single detached development. The inlet heights is probably spatially the largest area. That's essentially slope related housing, so it's on quite large lot. The other large lot is Vineyard Ranch Estates. That is adjacent to it. Artisan Place, that was intended as large lot, single detached, that had a home-based component to it, geared to artisans, so something that would be more impactful than what we would see in a general home-based development. The Foxwood Community Living area was intended for smaller lots, quite small, of about 350 square meters, with community gardens interspersed in that area. The agricultural area is not an ALR. It is intended for 10 large lot residential components with an urban agriculture, kind of a mix of different kinds of agriculture there. The Ocean Walk Quay is the main waterfront commercial, and that's where the high density residential is, both the 6-story and the 8-story development. There's quite a large component of what they're calling the age-in-place residential, and that runs the continuum from independent to hospice in that area. I'll go through some more around the policies related to that. The Sunshine Coast Academy, it includes 600 boarding students. This is an international school. It's a private school. So there's not a school component in this development that would serve local children. This is international and boarding. And then recreational areas, parks, and open space. This compares the two zones. So there are some elements that do run in common. So obviously the golf course replaced with both the agricultural area, some open space elements, and the school, taking up a fair bit of the land that would have been in the golf course. In the Silverback development, initially it did have a mixed-use commercial residential down on that waterfront area, covering most of the same area that is in the new zone. It did have, with this development, it did have a lot of large lot, single detached. It had a number of multi-unit developments interspersed around it. Some well located, some not. So it did have actually a higher yield because of that. There's two large multi-unit developments that are on the north side of that site that added to the yield. So in this development, it's looking at a number of, in addition to the waterfront commercial with the high-density residential by Saanich Inlet Road, it's looking at a number of essentially enclaves of different types of development. The Foxwood smaller lot is in that northwest site adjacent to the school. This is just another photo of more of the waterfront area, and you can see where the high density is intended to go along the Saanich Inlet Road with more of a commercial walkable core adjacent to the waterfront. Did I say Saanich? Yeah. Seashell. Sorry, I've done that so many times. I apologize. I'm entrenched, so sorry. It's also controlled by a number of development areas. In addition to the environmental, there's the gravel pit, there's two on the water course, marine, a number of the hazard areas, and steep slopes. It kind of covers the bulk of ours. And then in terms of form and character, it covers both the intensive residential, commercial, the DPA 9 commercial areas, and DPA 11 was the one that was custom designed for this area that covers the mixed residential and commercial. So the discussion that is that I wanted to go through and that is in the report is not really evaluating the development per se. I'm assuming if you got this far, you've had that. It's more of, in moving forward to make this development work, there are a number of pretty significant decisions that council will need to make. Because currently the way a number of things are structured, it's actually, the bylaw is actually in conflict with a number of our OCP policies, and under law you can't do that. So in order to make this development work, there are a number of different decisions that are going to have to be made to allow this to happen. The first one is around the growth management policies and the allocation of development. So as you've seen with the application, it does provide an interesting opportunity for a number of uses that we haven't seen, mainly the school and the artisan areas. So in order to really make it work, this is a significant urban development. For that to build out and for those things to be realized in a reasonable time frame, there's only so much growth to be allocated in Sechelt. And as is outlined in the OCP, we have far more zoned land than we have that we need. The areas that are identified, both in primary growth areas and in the secondary, accommodate 20 years of growth. We have an ability, in looking at the 20-year projections, I think they needed something like just under 8,500 units. We have 10,000 already in terms of the ability to allocate. So to provide for the critical mass for this development, it's going to have to be reallocated in order to make, if the desire is to set this development up for success, to get a critical mass, to be able to realize all that development, it's a pretty challenging decision of where would you like us not to, because it can't work. And the challenge from a district point of view on this is that there are two forms of development that work really well from a financial sustainability point of view. One is very urban on urban services, and one is quite rural on rural services. Where it gets difficult and risky is doing the in-between. And that's where if a development doesn't build out, particularly one that is in a location like this, and things fail, we now have residents there. Maybe not enough to support it, but we have residents and there's obligation to support them. And that means very expensive extensions of servicing if something fails. So number one is the development as it's done, because there were decisions around of not including it in urban containment, of it not being, it's never been in the urban containment boundary. Previous OCP designations identify in the OCP considered this to be more of a rural residential. So it conflicts with our growth management policies right now. So if the desire is to move it forward, there needs to be a number of amendments made to our OCP to bring it into alignment if that's the direction that you would like to go. So that's the two of them, is really the allocation and then our conflicting policies related to growth management of it's not in a priority or secondary area. Well, I want to go back to surfacing. The other area where, again, council will need to give some attention to how would you want to amend the OCP or give us direction on how to bring this into conformity, is there's very specific servicing policies in the OCP that really speak to that notion of urban development on urban services. And a lot of that was brought in because it was recognized that there's quite a dispersed pattern of development in Sechelt. There was a desire to, as we move forward, to concentrate it more, put it on in those priority areas of get that onto municipal services to allow for a more compact form of moving to more smart growth principles in there. And some very specific policies around limiting private services for a couple of reasons. One, it facilitates leapfrog development, and that was identified in the OCP. And the other is around the cost and the risk of that, that if it fails, there's an obligation on the district to fix that. Those become very clear health and safety issues, and they're in terms of Vancouver Coastal Health, those are pretty non-negotiable. So there needs to be some consideration in the OCP policy of how you would want that altered to be able to support this. The other element of this in terms of cost benefit is, while in putting something on private services or however you want to term it, but essentially the developer taking the responsibility for that, is it can support the site if done well and if you get critical mass. The challenge from a cost benefit perspective is if a development of that magnitude is moving forward and it's not connecting to our services, it limits the ability to leverage the benefit of that. They're not running a sewer line up to that may serve the areas on the way to it, to the south, and it's not getting us any closer to serving the areas that are in urban containment to the north of it. So it doesn't leverage anything for you. The other is, if it is in a private system, there's no DCCs attached to that. So need to give some consideration just to the cost benefit of moving forward on that aspect. The other that applies to this, but I'd actually say it more generally, of how we look at large-scale development here. There's we're kind of missing a step. And the issue I have is we go from large-scale OCP amendment, which, you know, broadly defines what we want to do in an area, and then we move to a permitting kind of process. We go into the zoning and we go into development permits and master development agreements. When you're back-ending a process like this, it puts a tremendous onus on both yourselves to interpret this as it moves forward for 15 years, to see if we're actually getting it right and meeting those conditions that we've established. And it's not as transparent as if there was an actual area plan on it, where people are very clear of what is being developed, how do the systems work, how does the road connection work, and really kind of nailing down a lot of those issues that I identified in the staff report. Of, it makes me very nervous to zone something where it's uncertain at that. Now, I realize that, you know, the option is we wouldn't move forward past adoption without knowing that. But that's moving an application very far down the road with some pretty fundamental issues unanswered for us. So part of it is looking as we move forward, hopefully not too late for this one, but for other large-scale developments, is to kind of take that neighborhood planning process and applying it to that, so that we have a very transparent process as to what's moving forward, what we're putting zoning on, where the DP areas are. And it just allows, in my mind, a little more effective decision-making on that. And I have a slide. I chose a neutral one. This is American, so that I wasn't identifying someone close to home. In terms of what a draft plan or a structure plan or an area plan would look like, these type of plans tend to involve quite a bit of both technical analysis and a lot of public engagement, particularly developing the vision, the principles, and the areas of what's needed for an area. And then it's all in one document. Because right now, with something this significant, there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of background information, there's the marketing concept that's come forward, but it hasn't kind of outlined, you know, chapter and verse of here's what's going to show up on the ground. And our public tends not to have access to the same degree to a master development agreement that they would to a plan. The other is if the ownership changes or it becomes different, you're well aware, and a future buyer is well aware of this is what it looks like. So it provides a little more transferability as well. And then the last issue is really along this line. I mean, I touched on it, but it's the notion of, in any development, but particularly a large-scale one that's involving a lot of infrastructure, a lot of parks and open space, it can be a tremendous benefit to the community in terms of what is being offered there, if it operates the way as intended, if it attracts that critical mass, and if it builds out in that way. Where it can become just a little more risk and a little more costing is, again, if it's not leveraging our other developments, but also if it doesn't build out and we're still maintaining something. So there's never, it's never costless, and this is the area where I sometimes suggest to council, sometimes you do need to look a gift horse in the mouth. Nothing's ever free, and there is always maintenance and an obligation on how we deal with these things. So it's not saying it's a bad thing, it's just saying with this entire development, if there's a commitment to it, we really need to set it up for success. If there isn't that, it can be problematic and put a lot of risk on the district, but also a lot of cost on our taxpayers. And so it's just something to keep in mind as this moves forward, that those kind of things will need to be settled before it goes too far down the line, but also needing some direction from you on it currently is not fitting with OCP. What kind of decisions would you like to make on that OCP? So in terms of the options of moving forward, there are the notion of moving forward with first reading and public hearing. Again, that's in response to what the earlier resolution was. It could be referred back for modification to the bylaw or to the conditions. It could be a request for additional information before moving forward, or it could be to deny the application. So the recommendations that were written for the report, if the desire is to move forward on first reading and public hearing, is that first you approve the list of required development conditions as outlined in attachment 1, and that you consider giving first reading to the zoning amendment and refer the bylaw to a public hearing. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. It was a pleasure to listen to and to think through, and the written report as well. I would ask, just in terms of process, we'll spend a few minutes clarifying any questions that councillors have for Ms. Corbett. Then we'll look at the 4 alternatives and move on that. And in between that, I'm going to need a break. It's now been 2 hours and some odd in this chair. So before we so we'll do the questions and clarify the report first, and I'll ask for a 5-minute recess. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. So for myself, one of the things that gave me the biggest trouble and why I believe this was sent back to staff for clarifications was around that issue of height. And I see that the application here is an application for 8 stories. All through the process, up until the point that it got here, the discussion was around 6 stories. And in my recollection of what happened, the additional 2 stories essentially showed up out of nowhere in the process. It's not in any of the zoning documents related to Silverback, and it didn't exist at committee meeting when we first dealt with this. So I'm just curious what around that particular issue of the height was able to be clarified.
Through the chair. In looking at the background information, the 8 stories was in a lot of the background information, but did not show up in one of the staff reports coming forward. It was in an attachment, I believe, and that was another area where it was less than linear in terms of figuring out where that was. In terms of the applicant's proposal that had been in there. So again, that is an area of giving consideration to. This is certainly a higher, more intense density than what we have in a number of areas, particularly in the downtown. So it would need to be something is council comfortable with something like that in an area that is well away from the downtown. But it had been in a number of the documentation, and it had been in the draft zoning bylaw.
Okay, we might have to look at some of the dates, because I did do quite a bit of research around this, and I'm just wondering if anything else popped up. Doesn't sound like it has. But.
Yeah, the question, I think, from your earlier comment was, has anything changed on this one? And I think what I heard the answer on this one was that the height had been in the applicant's packages at various points, but hadn't shown up in any of ours. until it came to first reading. And Councillor Inkster on the report.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question that I had thought of earlier when the presentation was made by Todd. Where would the DCCs apply in this which particular bylaw are we applying the DCCs from on this development?
Would there be parks DCCs?
No, is it the old
May not
bylaw?
be any wastewater if they did their own.
The old bylaw or the new bylaw?
Roads and do you want to speak to that one? No, just so I get it right.
And it would be the DCC bylaw revised under this council. I think that's the other question, whether this was in before or after the deadline.
I wouldn't meet the deadline.
Yes, Your Worship. No, the bylaw, it's anything in stream, but the 1-year grace period has long since passed. So it would apply to the current DCC bylaw, and roads, parks, and drainage DCCs would apply, sewer would not.
Okay, two questions well answered, thanks.
Anything else on the report? And I see Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. So if I heard you correctly, you're saying we actually are missing some pieces in this process. If we go forward with approving first reading and public hearing, which I think the community is looking to us to do, where can we fit in those processes that you're referring to ensure that we've addressed some of the questions and concerns that you've quite confidently and professionally raised to us?
Through the chair, there are a number of ways you could do it. So it would be the direction from council as to whether you would want to do that. It can still proceed in the normal manner of going through the rezoning process, developing the master development agreement, servicing agreements, those kind of things. It could still proceed that way. But before you get to final adoption on the bylaw, there would need to be clarity that they have met a number of those conditions because they've written in prior to final. And then the other is, before you get into adoption, is to make sure that the conflict between the OCP has been resolved. So we would probably need to come forward at the same time with some OCP amendments to make sure that that is being addressed, or have a good strategy for how we would be doing that. So it could do an area plan if the applicant was willing to do that. There's a lot of the background information done on a number of the pieces in terms of the concept, the vision, a lot of the principles, some of the initial technical information, but that's fairly broad-based. It would just mean going into a little more detail and putting it into a plan. So if they were willing to commit to that, and from a staff perspective, we'd certainly assist on that.
So do we need to put anything in our processes here now in order to do that? Or is that something that we would want to have a commitment towards prior to public hearing or not?
Through the chair, it wouldn't need to be prior to public hearing. We already have in the OCP the ability to do neighborhood plans, so this would fit with that. It's just we have tended to do the neighborhood plans for existing areas. This is just doing it for a new neighborhood, but it's the same kind of process that's involved in it, and it would require an approval.
Okay, and then you're talking about bringing it into alignment with our current OCP. Does that also address the urban containment boundary piece, or is that separate and does not need to be addressed?
Well, this is where through the chair, where it gets into a bit of a quandary is if the decision had been made if it was a designated growth area within the urban containment boundary to be serviced with municipal services, a lot of those conflicts aren't there. The challenge is that this is not a growth area. It's not in urban containment. It's not being serviced with municipal services. It's those kind of elements, along with another one. The other is it also conflicts with the downtown first kind of policy because it's there isn't enough catchment area in something like that to support that level of development. So it's got to come from somewhere. So you're actually reallocating commercial as well, possibly from your downtown. So sorry, I kind of lost where I was going there. There has to be a change in a lot of our other policies in there, because we've been very clear in the OCP of not supporting that kind of development on, large-scale development, urban development on alternative standards. So it would need a modification to a number of our policies to allow it to move forward if the decision is not to make it a priority growth area or put it into urban containment. So it's just set up this conflict there that it's out of alignment with a lot of the policy framework.
Okay.
Okay, if I can ask for that 5-minute recess so we can gather ourselves and come back to considering the issue before council. Thank you. Deputy Mayor. Okay, thank you for your patience. Lots of things to think about, lots of things to discuss. And welcome back to those who are viewing online, if you've been patient enough to watch the streaming since 7 o'clock, or if you've just tuned in. We're glad you're here. We're going to have to put bookmarks on the video so people can come in and out of the stream when they want to and find out what's there. So I thank you very much for your report. I look to council to see if there's any other clarifications, and then we'll turn to the recommendations or the options, and I'm actually not sure how to move this through. Yes, it's page 97 of our agenda package, item 8.3, and I don't know if we need to do the development conditions in attachment 1 and then go to considering first reading, or we just jump to the chase. Let's start with the second recommendation, that if this proposal goes to first reading and beyond, that council approves the list of required development conditions as outlined in attachment 1. Can I have somebody move that? Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Shanks. Is there any discussion of those required development conditions that we'd seen and had been part of earlier discussions? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Page 107, number 18. Talks about on-site wastewater facility or a connection to the municipal sewer service when available. As I think council and the community know, I am in favor of actually having this connect to our water resource center due to a number of things. One is the potential for risk for the municipality. If the waste treatment on site is, I mean, how do they size it given the build out that could potentially happen, and the not having outflow into the inlet, and the fact that I believe that the Sechelt Nation is against it as well. So I am more in favor of the municipal sewer service connection. It also then provides sewer to the communities along the way up to that site. So, but I do want to see this go to first reading and public hearing, and I'd like to hear what the public says about that. So I would support it in its present format. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for highlighting item 18. That was one that I had circled and then forgotten. And Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. It's my view that this recommendation is a little bit premature. We've got some major issues still to deal with in terms of specifically in my mind the height of the building. We are asking in this case to approve multiple buildings of 6 to 8 stories, and the list of development conditions that we've dealt with other similar projects is so extensive, much more extensive that's included in this list. And I think since we didn't consider the 8 stories at committee, at least that's not my recollection, that that we need to go back and deal with those in a different way. So I'm not going to be voting in favor of this.
Thank you for that. And while we're on 18, I would just say that when I was reading it through, my understanding of our discussion of conditions was, yes, it would be on site, not a package plant in the traditional sense, but a treatment plant. But the phrases that I tripped over was in accordance with and acceptable to the various regulatory authorities. And we had made it very clear that if there was on-site treatment, it would be land-based, that it would in fact meet and match the regulatory permits that are on the Water Resource Center in Sechelt, not simply whatever the provincial authorities may allow. So it was to meet the highest standards that we're currently meeting for the rest of Sechelt, and that's so in accordance with and acceptable to the various regulatory authorities is not what I recall our discussion. Is there any other discussion of this particular attachment of development conditions? If not, we do have a motion on the floor, and it could go forward even and be redeveloped. But I guess that's a question to staff. If at public hearing, could the attachment of conditions be altered or amended?
Just to clarify, to be following, if there were changes needed to this, can they do that? You can modify. It just needs to be in open forum. If you have to redo a public hearing under the legislation, if you change density, you change use, or you downzone. So if it's not following within there, you probably don't have to do a new public hearing.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you. So I'll actually just, if there's no other questions on the attached list of development conditions. Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, just the one question. If you were lowering density, would that still apply?
Chair, the provisions in the legislation are if you're lowering the density without the permission of the applicant, is basically it. So it's in the absence of it. So in some cases, a municipality may choose to downzone an area. In the case where if you were tweaking something like this or taking out the 8-story, no, but technically. I would advise that on some cases like this, it is usually better to be upfront and err on the side of if you think you might need another public hearing, do that. Particularly with complex developments, there have been cases where it has not gone well and it's ended up in a lot of process, a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the issue of development conditions and attachment 1, there's no other. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, those are, let me count that again. I was abstaining, which was a vote in favor of the attachments, but I want to say all those in favor and all those opposed. Okay, the development conditions as attached are passed, and that's required. And then we go to the issue that we really need to deal with is a motion to consider first reading to zoning amendment bylaw number 25271 2016 SSC Properties Limited, and refer the bylaw to a public hearing on a date to be determined. To have that on the floor, somebody would move. Councillor Seegers, and seconded. Thank you, Councillor Wright. And for discussion, if you don't mind, I'll break the normal tradition and speak first, in part because people often wonder what the chair thinks of a meeting when I'm just watching and listening to other council members, and partly because the community charter suggests that the mayor's role is at times to recommend policies. We've looked at this project since 2015. It, in fact, was first introduced as pre-election 2014. It was announced by the new owners at that time as a great development that was going to come and change the face of Sechelt. I think it's time. We've had 4 planners looking at it, 3 of them in the director's role, an interim director, Andrew as a director, and now Ms. Corbett as a director, and another planner in between, including workshops with council and legal counsel on what is required to make this work and to bring it forward. And in that year and a half, nothing has changed. We still have a plan that is more of a promise to plan and doesn't reflect the conditions and understanding that we require from much, much smaller projects. So I don't think it's ready. I'm going to recommend that we say yes to the vision documents that set out the values for the District of Sechelt, that we say yes to the official community plan, that we say yes to the Downtown Business Core and the Downtown First, and we say no to SSC for first reading or further development. Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. I think we've been hearing from the community for quite a while that they would like a say in this. And the only way they're going to get that is if we give it first reading and take it to public hearing where they can actually give us the input and let us know whether or not they want this to move forward or not. So I'm going to be supporting this so that we actually get that input.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Mueller.
Thank you, Your Worship. This particular development I'm dealing with, and in relation to the other ones that we've dealt with, and how they were dealt with in a fair manner, I think. And just to get back to the principles of our vision and what we want for our town. So just to keep this in mind, there's a recommendation here that we move forward with the zoning for 6 to 8 stories outside of our downtown, where currently that is not recommended anywhere outside of the downtown. 8 stories has only been actually ever been considered once, and in that case, we had a project that was completely spelled out. That's the Spanny development just up the hill. It was completely spelled out in every aspect of the massing, the development permit, the servicing, and even at that time, council had a difficult time dealing with such a big project, and this proposes multiple buildings of that size. If I was given the opportunity to vote on the original Silverback, I would vote no, because 6 stories that is included in that one is simply so difficult to service where it is, and presents a lot of challenges. I have to look at this and say there's too many large buildings in one place outside of our downtown core, and for me to be comfortable with that, we need to have the plan and the project spelled out in much clearer terms. So at this case, I couldn't support it.
Any Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I too have to deny this. It has been a long, drawn-out process, and I think it's time we tell the developer this isn't what we want outside of the downtown. I think that it's spreading our resources too far. We already have issues around pipes going for miles before they connect to anyone. It's part of our service costs that can become unmanageable if we go even further. I don't like the idea of what it'll do to downtown. There's so many things about our OCP that this disagrees with. It's not smart growth in my mind, so I would deny the application.
Any other discussion at this point before we call the question? Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I would just like to thank the Director of Planning for putting things so succinctly and understandable to this council, because really, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that has been done, and the decisions that have to be made if this is to move forward. So thank you very much for that. Overwhelmingly pleased with the report and how you've explained every step of this particular project to us. So thank you very much for that.
Any other discussion? No. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah. This isn't, with this particular piece of land,
Yes.
This isn't my first rodeo with this particular piece of land, and the presentations put forward on it, and I've sat at the table with other council members who have been at those previous discussions and have been at the previous public hearing situation where the developer and or the community speaks on it. So I've tended to always be in favor of listening to giving the public an opportunity to speak at the public hearings. In terms of this one, if I'm leaning that way, and I sort of am, I would like to hear people speak if in fact we go that way, and I'm not hearing that we are, but that's fine. It's always an opportunity that I prefer to give, is to hear the public speak to how it fits into our OCP. We've heard the report, have the public speak to how it fits into our vision plan, because we have to understand that many of the ideas that are in our OCP and were in our vision plan were presented and put forward by hundreds of people in our community, some of which are probably now in favor of this project. who brought in the OCP ideas and vision plans. So it gets a little confusing for me because I know who many of those people are. But I want to give an opportunity for a number of people to step up and speak how they think it fits. A lot of people like to throw around the job shibboleth, I guess we'll call it. But as I said, this is not my first rodeo. I've seen a number of projects proposed, large like this, and they don't move forward. So I want to hear about the planning aspects, how they think it will benefit our downtown, how they think it will be a plus to our infrastructure, and you know, why they think it's good for Sechelt, other than, you know, we have to talk some planning policies and some dig really deep as we present it, because there's buzzwords that people like to use, but I think as a council, other than the sort of the bandwagon decision making and some of that the cheerleader decision making that sometimes happens in small communities, we need to make a decision based on some concrete facts and information. So that's where I'd like to see us go, and that's where I'd like to see us listen. I want to hear what the community has to say. Thank you.
Any other discussion? And I see Councillor Seegers.
I don't think as a council or as a community we've actually had any development come forward that's this big before. We've had plans for areas, but in each case, only a small piece of that has come forward at any particular time where we worked with that piece only. So I don't think, I mean, I like your report, I like the information you've given us, and I believe you have the experience and the knowledge to be able to guide us through this in putting together either a master plan or some kind of area plan where the concerns like Councillor Mueller has expressed around, you know, clear terms around the project, what it would look like in each of the areas, so that there would be some certainty for the community and certainty for developers, even if the property were to be sold, so that we have that information and know that going forward it would be built as designed. So I trust that you could take us through that, and I'd like to see if the community is in support of this so that we can get to that stage and get that level of detail. We may get down the road a little further and find that no, the community doesn't like the details that are coming forward, but I think we need to give the community the opportunity to share that with us. So I guess I'm in favor of moving it on at this stage. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would very much like to see this project go forward to the community for input. However, I think in good conscience, it would be irresponsible on my part to do that when I look at this overall project and I look at the variations from the OCP, when I look at the height of the buildings, which I'm not in favor of. And as I look at this project, why would I take it to the community if we're not satisfied with that this is good for Sechelt? There's no question this project is good for the developer, but I'm not sure when I look at what might happen to the downtown when I have this commercial venture happening out on this property. That gives me great concern, and I don't believe that it's good for Sechelt as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to say a couple of words. One, I'll wait until after the vote to comment on. But to the issue of moving it forward to public hearing as opposed to denying first reading now, I've usually been of a more laissez-faire attitude on these things, suggesting that it doesn't really matter one way or another which way it goes. If the marketplace wants to move something forward and that damages the marketplace in West Sechelt, then so be it. Just council doesn't need to make the decision. And it could be an easy way to move this forward, just a public hearing, gets to public hearing in a couple of months, and then it sits, and might even be after the election before it comes back again. I think that's the wrong thing to do. This is not a 14-lot subdivision. This is not a 4-acre subdivision. This is the most significant zoning that would impact the District of Sechelt by 30% of its current population and would totally disrupt all of the planning that's been done in the last 15 years about where growth might be, all of the investment that's been done in the last 15 years about the urban containment boundary, everybody who has property in West Sechelt thinking that that's where the urban containment boundary will be. And if you read the number of times the planner's report uses the word risk, I realize that it's our responsibility to avoid those risks for the district and for the economy of the District of Sechelt. And the most important thing we can do now is say this is in fact not even ready for public hearing. It's not ready yet. And Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I wanted to comment because I've heard some councillors express what they feel is the need to get this on to public hearing. Of course, we always want community feedback, but when council passes the first reading and puts it on, we're putting our stamp on it. We're saying this meets our criteria, and we want to hear what you think. This is not something that's exactly middle of the road. We've given a clear indication about how we feel about the project as it stands, and I think if we were to do that, the developers that we have worked with over the past number of years and the requirements that we've imposed upon them to go and even entertain anything that's 6 to 8 stories, I think it's a slap in the face to those people that we've been working with and the way that we've been working with them. And it's not something that I would ever recommend that this council do.
Have we canvassed the conversation and the discussion among councillors? In that case, we'll look for the question, and just to remind ourselves, the motion on the floor is to give first reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 25271, SSC Properties Limited. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that's defeated. One thing I'd like to add to this is a comment that's reflecting to the community, and I have heard a lot of people talk about this in the community. One strain of thought that is there, and you see it a lot on social, is that this project has been delayed over time and had barriers put up for political reasons. And I'd like to say that if anything, it's been just the opposite. Because this was raised before the 2014 election, there's a number of people on council, and myself included, who, in an attempt to be absolutely objective, gave more credibility and credence to this as it came forward. We tried to keep asking and providing and working and telling our planners to help them work it through, and we didn't get what we needed from developers. We've had 4 planners look at this, every single one of them telling us the project isn't ready and the proponents haven't provided the kind of detailed work that Councillor Mueller has been mentioning. Despite that, we've done our best to try and work and not turn this into a political issue because of the proponents that are involved. Tonight, I think we made a decision we should have made in 2015. Thank you. It's been defeated. No, we don't need to do that. We don't need to. Just a reminder to record the negative vote. Yeah, thank you. And moving on in the agenda to item 8.4, we have about 24 minutes to get through the rest of the evening. 8.4 is the Porpoise Bay Harbor Regulation Amendment Bylaw. And just to be clear, it's on page 134 of your agenda. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you, seconded. And that report is from the corporate officer. If we give you a moment to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report and attached bylaw proposes for council to proceed with adoption of District of Sechelt Porpoise Bay Harbor Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 494 2017. This bylaw was given 3 readings by council at its February 21st regular meeting, and it would be appropriate to consider adoption.
Thank you, and we have then a recommendation to adopt. If we could have somebody make that motion, seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? It's carried. Then we'll move to the actual bylaw in our redundant process. Could somebody please move adoption of bylaw number 494-2, 2017, a bylaw to amend Porpoise Bay Harbor Regulation bylaw number 494, 2010. All those in favor? Did I get a mover and adopter? I had lots of hands up, thank you. Okay, and that's carried. A technical question. If we adopt it in 2018, is it still called bylaw number 494-2, 2017?
Yes, Your Worship, because the title of the bylaw as cited comes from when it was first read a first time, when the title was first given to it. So it's actually part of the title.
Thank you. And for the next item, Councillor Inkster is recusing himself. But just before he does, are you going to bother coming back or not? It's late. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay, so we don't want to go looking for you later and then find that we can't find you. So he did have his children with him, so it's appropriate to get home before 10 o'clock. Okay, receipt of item number 10.2, seconded. Thank you, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And we'll turn then to our planning director again. The report was written, doesn't even say by which, but if we could just speak briefly to this.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of the council. This is a requirement for a liquor license endorsement. The desire is for Gilligan's Pub to move their the portion of their liquor license related to the retail store from their current location to a location in Wilson Creek. And it just simply requires an endorsement to move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Just in terms of questions, has the process changed? Is it something the provincial government will actually determine, but they need our endorsement? And I'm just asking because there was a fair amount of, the last time a liquor license was moved in Sechelt, there was lots more going on about it. It didn't seem like such a simple thing. And in fact, coming out of that, there was 2 breach of trust charges. So I just want to make sure this is simple, straightforward, and we don't need to ask any questions that we're not missing anything here.
My understanding was it was fairly straightforward. Now I'm thinking, gosh, should I have asked a few more questions here? My understanding is they need a council resolution simply to do the change. I haven't been aware of any other issues than that. They look to us to make sure that the location works, and it is a regional commercial, so it certainly would be in keeping.
Thank you, and Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, so my question was about the actual process of moving a license. So we're moving a portion, so Gilligan's Cold Beer and Wine Store will still exist, and they're applying for a second, is that correct?
No, they can only have 1 license for retail, so it'll move. So like the Lighthouse has off sales at the bar, but their retail is out by the 4-way lights. And in this case, the Gilligan will be there and it'll have off sales at the bar, but their retail operation will be in Wilson Creek.
Okay, thank you.
At one time, the community was quite concerned about the proliferation of access points for alcohol along Highway 101, but I haven't heard that for many years. And there is quite a community in Wilson Creek. And there used to be a beer and wine brewery, like a make your own wine on the site that they're heading for. So I'm not sure where they'll go, but in that mall. Yeah, in that mall. Any other questions, any concerns that you may have on behalf of the community? It's been moved. Was it moved? Yes. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And we're at reports from council. And without being restrictive, I'd also just suggest it is 9:45 and we don't want to pass a bylaw to spend more time here tonight past 10 o'clock. But I'll start on my left with Director Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll try and keep it brief. Attended the SDBA annual general meeting, and that was a fun time. Went to the normal Planning and Development, Public Works Committee meetings, spent some time with the SCRD infrastructure and budget meetings. Went to the Business Excellence Award dinner. And then I attended the Oscar evening by the Rotary, and that was a fun night. They raised $7,500 for Arrowhead.
Wow.
So it was quite an evening. And so I'll let it go at that. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. I attended the ribbon cutting for the renovation for the library with regards to the Canada 150 grant, the Downtown Business Association AGM with a number of the other councillors. They had Charles Gauthier, the CEO of Downtown Vancouver BIA. He's been there a number of years, and he actually came and talked about Reimagine Downtown Vancouver project. And what he indicated was that they now have credibility with the city, so that when things are happening downtown, they actually look to the plan that they put together to reimagine downtown Vancouver. Julie Rogers, our new communications manager, has been interviewing all of the council and the senior staff, and I had my opportunity to talk with her about a communication plan. I attended the Coast Community Builders Association AGM, the special infrastructure meeting at the SCRD regarding water, the Business Excellence Awards. It's nice to see all three chambers on the Sunshine Coast here working together. And then some of you have probably seen the ads and the newspaper articles, etc., around the Women's Campaign School that happened this past Saturday. Lori Pratt, the chair of the school district, and I put that on. We ended up with 42 women attending. That's not counting the speakers. So I'd like to thank the speakers and the sponsors. And Councillor Lutz was there. We had a women's panel, elected women's panel. Councillor Lutz was there. Julie Rogers, our communications person here, did a session on media and social media. And Joanne Frank, along with the other two corporate officers, came and did a session on the nomination process and legislation that we work inside of. So I'd like to thank all of you. There will be an ad in the paper, both papers, thanking the sponsors and the speakers. As you're out in the community, I request that you thank them on behalf of the women who attended. Thank you.
Thank you for that report, and thank you for the work at creating more interest in women candidates and candidates in general with the campaign school. I hope that out of that school we have a number of candidates up and down the coast joining the potential election in 2018. It's so important that we have a good turnout, a healthy interest in who serves. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll keep it brief. Like the other councillors, in the past 2 weeks, what's been eating up most of my time is the budget. And of course, we all had to rework SSC as it made it back. And of course, that takes a lot of time. But I also attended the meeting with our communications manager, and she has left. So I was just going to thank her for that. It was great to hear some other perspectives on communications.
Thank you. And Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. Yes, lots of committee meetings, SCRD. I also attended the Business Excellence Awards, and GBS, a 71-year business here on the coast, family run, won the Legacy Award, which was quite exciting for us because my husband worked 26 years for them, and I went to school with the second generation that has run that business with the daughters. I also attended, as mentioned, the Women's Campaign School. I think that's the fourth one I've attended here on the coast, and have attended others off coast. But that was one of the best, and I thank the presenters. It's encouraging for anyone who has an interest to learn about all of the ins and outs of being a public face. Tomorrow, we met the SCRD, and that only to observe, but there's been some ongoing discussions that I'm hoping to see the end of. Tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock at the Roberts Creek Community Hall, it's International Women's Day, and I encourage men, women, and children to attend. It's free, and all you need to do is bring a food item for the shared table. So thank you.
Thank you for that report. And Councillor Shanks.
Very briefly, Your Worship, after getting back from holidays, I attended the SDBA annual general meeting, and they had a guest speaker representing BIA in the Lower Mainland, a very interesting speaker. And unfortunately, there was a good turnout. Initially, there was only about 17 people signed up. I think there was between 35 and 40 there, so that was good. Apart from that, I've attended the Public Works and the planning meetings of last week. And more recently, I've talked with the communications manager and spent about three-quarters of an hour with her, giving her some input. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. In terms of my report, I just recognize that I was away for a week and thank Deputy Mayor Lutz for all the work that she did and for council's support of our processes while I was away. Nowhere exciting. It was Mississauga and it was cold, but I came back here and it was colder. But even being away in Mississauga gives you an opportunity to reflect on and see Sechelt from a different perspective. In this case, 3,000 kilometers away and hanging out in malls to get my Starbucks. But it still gives you a chance to think about what urban development is really like if it's let to run amok. Of course, Mississauga is also the home of the longest serving mayor in Canada, so I made sure I walked past City Hall a few times to see what I could learn. And that would be my report. It's been very busy since then because I was sick on our return, but we've, I think, caught up with all of our meetings and things that were scheduled. So I would move to 11.2. Oh, I did want to mention one other thing. One of the best, on Sunday afternoon, on a sunny day, I had a chance to go for a walk with Councillor Mueller. We were looking for some development things that were happening on West Porpoise Bay and trying to understand. Some of you may remember when East Porpoise Estates went in, they had a walkway that was pinned out over the water. And there's a strata pipe, and we couldn't find that. It's overgrown, I guess, with blackberries. But we did meet a number of residents when we went to ask what we were looking for, and they took us for a stroll along an area, a beach access that I'd never been on before, which goes from the Shora Heights Marina up into the area, and then a beautiful esplanade walking trail, which is actually in front of the homes that are on South Gale Avenue South. And we got a chance to talk for 45 minutes or so to 4 residents of the area and talk about their concerns and what they thought of Porpoise Bay and what they heard across the water and derelict boats, but mostly about neighborhood things. And it was a very well spent 45 minutes. So thank you for Councillor Mueller for getting me out of the house and for others for talking to me. And that'll move us to SCRD 11.2. We've spent most of our time on budgets in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, both preparing for and then going through the round 2 of the budget. You'll also know that we've been having fairly lengthy and complex procedural discussions on water, and in particular, the interest that the District of Sechelt has on focusing on supply and storage of supply with less emphasis on emergency measures for drought. And some of us are of the opinion that too much focus on the Chapman Lake project, which is only to be used in stage 4, will distract us from the need to get supplies in place for stage 2 and 3. Not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody on this council agrees. And certainly at the regional board, not everyone agrees. What's interesting is that in the complicated voting structures of the regional board, the people that are actually part of the water service area and their votes based on population and density, there's an equal number opposed and an equal number in favor. So anything positive to go forward with the Chapman project can be blocked, and anything that says to redirect it somewhere else can be blocked. Forgetting the areas, then the committees all vote one person, one vote, and the board votes one person, one vote for non-financial matters. And there's a majority of rural areas that are weighing in at that place. One of the very interesting things, there's 7 people, I say, on the water service. One of them is Area A, and they have no access to the Chapman system, but they vote on whether or not how we proceed and where we spend our $5 million. Area B is also voting on it, though their director is not going to be standing in the next election, but he wants to make sure his views are carried forward into that world. Roberts Creek, same situation. We have a director that doesn't want to be on the board any longer and won't be serving, but wants to make sure that his views are held while he's not there. And then Area E, Elphinstone, for very different reasons, wants the Chapman project to stop. And then Area F, which has about 10% of its water, is also in favor of the Chapman project going forward, but gets almost no water from the system. So when you actually look at who's using the system and who's here to try and push this forward, we've got a very interesting political standoff. So Sechelt Nation don't vote on it, but they do have expressed their concerns very clearly and their interest in making sure we do something, but making sure we don't use Chapman Lake except for stage 4 drought. So that's the SCRD board. There will be some more work tomorrow. I have no idea whether even procedurally we'll be able to address it. I don't know. I don't have enough skills and understanding of the various bylaws, and I've been in the system a long time. Moving on to item 12, we have council correspondence, a motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. Are there any of those? I noticed one of them had an invitation. Is there any of those that we need to address directly? And without page numbers, I couldn't find the one from Transport Canada. Okay. If we seeing nothing else, we'll move on from correspondence, and I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, and seconded. Thank you, all those in favor. And 4 minutes before 10 o'clock for a few questions or comments from the community. And